Hello and welcome to the Connection Compass podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Louise Evans. This week we meet Annette Williams. Annette is a cognitive behavioural hypnotherapist, confidence specialist and former award-winning BBC television producer whose career in media spans nearly 4 decades. In this episode, we talk about following your ambition from an early age, embracing opportunities, navigating the highs and challenges of live TV, and reinventing yourself when one chapter comes to an end. Annette shares powerful insights on mindset, confidence, resilience, and how transferable skills can help shape an entirely new future. From creating magical moments on some of the UK's biggest TV shows to helping people overcome fears and self-doubt, this is a conversation full of optimism, honesty, and inspiration. Hello, Annette, and welcome to the Connection Compass podcast. I am honoured that you're here. For our listeners, please could you share a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Andrea, and I'm delighted to be here. Yes, my name is Annette Williams. I'm a confidence hypnotherapist. I'm an author. I'm a lecturer, and I'm the founder of Silverbrook Hypnotherapy.
Now, before you went into hypnotherapy, you were a TV producer for the BBC. You won awards. That career lasted 38 years. Can you share about your journey into that career?
Yes, certainly, yes. When I introduce what I do now, it doesn't seem to relate to what I did for what has been so far the majority of my professional career. Yes, but for 38 years, I worked in television, and it was always my dream. I was one of these lucky children who knew what they wanted to do. And I thought everybody at 10 or 11 knew what they wanted to do, but that was based on my experience and the experience of my mum. She knew she wanted to be a doctor from a very early age. And so latterly, as I've met people who didn't have that same clarity in there as a preteen, I'm always quite surprised. But I knew I always wanted to work in television. I was a great viewer. I absorbed television. I remember the first time I saw colour television come in. I am that old. And the impact that it had as me on a young child. So I knew where I wanted to go, but I had absolutely no idea how to get there. And so I did the usual thing, go through school. I'm interested in some of the creative subjects and things like that. But back when I was looking around for universities, media study courses, as we know them now, didn't exist. The state of the industry wasn't at a place where you were able to do courses in it. So I did a degree in cultural studies where there was an element of film and TV analysis in it. And then I came back to Cardiff. I'm Welsh, I'm from Cardiff. And I came back to Cardiff to do a postgraduate in a really early media course. And I loved it because it allowed me to get hands-on with cameras and learn some of the technology and get my first taste of producing. And how I got into television is a direct result of doing that course because you had to make a final project. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? And actually, I was quite lazy. I thought, well, where can I save time on doing the research? And I thought, I know, I'll make a film about me because I already know everything about me. So I actually, for my final project, made my own obituary where it was, which sounds quite bizarre now, but it was a fun obituary and it was celebrating my achievements and my imagined future achievements.
Yeah.
But what happened is that this film, I now had a calling card, and this allowed me to, when approaching TV companies, I had something to show them. But I didn't actually have to do that. So even though that was my plan, I got my first foot in the door of the BBC via my sister's engagement party. Because lots of family and friends were there, and my sister had a lot of her friends there, and everyone's going, "Oh, Annette, let's see your film." It was literally a couple of weeks after I'd finished my postgrad, so I put it on so my aunties and all that could see it. And unbeknownst to me, one of my sister's friend's boyfriend worked at the BBC in Wales, and so we got chatting afterwards. He said, "Oh, that's a cool film. Do you want to come into the BBC in Cardiff and have a look around?" So, yes, please. So I went in for a day to have a look around, and I ended up staying for 38 years. I mean, obviously not in the same place, but once I got in, So yes, I was helped with my first step in the door. And some people say, oh, well, that's nepotism no, that was an opportunity that I grabbed. I was invited back the next day and the next week and the next month because of what I was doing. And so, yeah, I started my career at BBC Wales in Cardiff, where I was a researcher on Wales Today. But I knew the aim was always children's programmes, because to rewind to when I was a child, those are the programmes that I wanted to do. And as a viewer, I just thought it looked so much fun in children's television. But I was now in news in Cardiff and children's television was in London. So I had 18 months at BBC Wales, which was fantastic and a great opportunity to learn. And then a job was advertised in BBC Plymouth. And I didn't actually know where Plymouth was. I had to look on a map. I was thinking it was closer to Exeter. And it's like, no, it's way further southwest than that. So I applied for this job as a researcher. It was the same job as I was doing, with the plan that this was going to be a bit of leverage for them to give me more at BBC Wales. But that backfired in that I got the job and BBC Wales wished me good luck as I moved to Plymouth. So I then moved to BBC Plymouth and I worked there for 3.5 years. So geographically, I was even further away from London, which is where I wanted to go. But for those 3.5 years, I learned so much, because when you're in a smaller station and you have ideas and you're keen and you're eager and you're lucky to have people there who spot that in you, they allowed me to learn and to try things. And so I went as a researcher, and then I said I really want to be a studio director, and so then I was trained up as a studio director, and then I really wanted to have a go at doing some longer form documentaries, and so they allowed me and they helped me do that. And so in those 3.5 years, I think I learned more than people could learn in a decade in another thing, because it was smaller and people were willing to take a chance on me. But then the advert came out for BBC Children's, and this is what I was waiting for. And they used to do every year a trainee scheme to bring people into BBC Children's, and I was feeling quite confident. I was quite a big fish in a little pond in BBC Plymouth, and so I applied for one of these trainee assistant producer roles, and I didn't get it, because I'd overlooked the key thing in that, yes, I was very familiar with the TV shows I watched when I was a child, but once I'd outgrown them, I wasn't a viewer now. And that's a mistake that people often make in that if you've got to keep up with content, you've got to still be in that world. And so I didn't get it the first year I applied. So I went back to Plymouth, and I thought, right, I know it's going to be advertised again next year. I'm going to go for it. And fair enough, 12 months later, I did apply and I got it. And I moved up to London and I started working on Newsround, which was a nice transition because I'd come from a news background. But the cherry on the cake, the goal that I was aiming for was Saturday morning television. And I also got Going Live, which was one of the biggest Saturday morning shows ever, and certainly a huge wide appeal. And that started my career in BBC Children's. And I stayed in BBC Children's for well over 30 years, specialising in that, and worked on all of the shows that you can possibly imagine. I think throughout my career, I've made 66 different series, many of which had multiple series within that one title. So there's 66 different titles. And I loved every minute of it. It was such a fantastically creative environment. The opportunities that I had and grabbed were incredible. And my professional life and my social life, they were all interlinked. I worked hard, I played hard. And I moved around all of the different shows. And my original aim had been to work on Saturday morning television, and I then became the executive producer of Saturday morning television. So even down to the specific show, it was a different show by the time I took it from when I was a viewer to when I became in charge of it. But I achieved that goal. And I absolutely loved it. Went all around the world, met anybody you could possibly ever want to meet. And then in 2011, the BBC had announced that Children's was relocating from Television Centre in London up to Media City in Salford. And I had to make the decision, do I go with BBC Children's, or do I stay in London and explore other options? And along the way, I had plenty of offers to leave the BBC. Other people had tried to headhunt me and entice me away, but nothing that they were offering was better than what I had in the role that I was in. So I never deviated from BBC, but I did change locations yet again and decided to move up to the Northwest when the BBC relocated, because by this time I had a daughter and it was just me and her, and she was 8. And I thought this is a good time for her to move. I am a specialist in children's now. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. And why not? London, I'd lived in London for 20 years, but it wasn't my home. And I'd never really worked much in the Northwest. So we moved. And yeah, moved up, helped establish the BBC at Media City. And for another 10 or so years, enjoyed it. Worked through COVID, which I'm sure we'll probably come on to how we dealt with that. But then in July 2022, after, I guess I could see the writing on the wall, I was made redundant. Oh, my role was made redundant. And so I was faced with a decision. Do I continue trying to work in television? Do I do something different? And significantly, I was 60 by this stage. So it was a pivotal moment, one where I decided to pivot.
I mean, it's just incredibly fascinating, that story. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about that knowing that you had when you were a child. How do you describe that? Is that a feeling, a focus, or a vision, or is it a combination of lots of different things that became your drive to move forwards?
Well, I think initially I was lured by the fun aspect of it.
Yeah.
Just, I'm an off the scale extrovert in terms of where I get my energy from. I love being around people. And all of these shows that I admired, a lot of them were quite frenetic, quite crazy, but full of joy and fun. But also I'm an avid learner. I love facts. I love learning anything. So children's television kind of offered everything to me on a plate, and it was tailored for me. And it just looked like so much fun. I had no idea what jobs even existed in television. I didn't know anything about the production process, but I knew that this looked like a fun place to be, and where I'd already experienced the impact of the content that they were making as a viewer, and I thought, no, this is where I want to be. So it was really clear, but it was a clear vision. But the journey between where I was and where I wanted to be was completely blank. I had no idea. It felt, we used to go up to London a couple of times a year on the train. I knew that the BBC was in London. It didn't feel like something that I could easily get to. I mean, maybe if it'd been closer, in Bristol, say, it would have felt a little bit more achievable. But back then in the 1970s, London felt like a long way away. So, I had a goal. I didn't have a plan.
And then those opportunity, the initial opportunity that came along at your sister's engagement party, I suppose there's confidence there in recognizing that opportunity and just saying yes. Have you got some advice that you can share about recognizing those opportunities and just saying yes and just going for it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of work that I do with my clients now, and it comes down to our mindset. And everybody's familiar with is the glass half empty or half full metaphor. And a lot of people who can't recognize the opportunities have a tendency to see life through a more negative lens. And perhaps I was lucky, perhaps it was genetics, whatever it was, I am definitely a glass half full. I am an endless optimist. I have always thought I could do things and then been very disappointed when I turned out I couldn't. I go in with an attitude, oh, I can do this, but I have a go. But when you meet people, or if you are a person who has a tendency to see all of the barriers, you can't see the goal behind it, you're just fixated on the barriers, then I ask you, I encourage you to challenge, where's the evidence? How solid are these barriers? And where do they exist? And if it's just in your imagination, or if it's just in someone else's belief but not in yours, then those type of barriers are very quick to dispose of. And it's focusing on where, the end goal. Don't look at, I knew where I wanted to get. I had no idea how to get there. And you can apply that attitude in that if what you want is strong enough, a pull, you will find a way. It might not be straight through these barriers. You might have to circle around some, climb over others, dig under others. But if the end goal in mind is important enough to you, then you certainly have the resourcefulness and the resilience within you to be able to get there. And all it takes is a slight shift of your mindset from a what if to a why not.
Saturday morning TV around the time that you were there. I mean, it was so much fun, wasn't it? It was such a joy. It was just out few hours of just fun. And is there a particular moment during that time that was just the best? I mean, I know you're very passionate and I know that you absolutely love that time, but is there just one thing that just really stands out for you?
You're right. In its heyday, the BBC Saturday morning shows I worked on both live, going live, live and kicking, and the Saturday show. But I would say the end of going live and all of live and kicking was the pinnacle, and millions and millions of people would watch it. I mean, it was technically a children's program, but we know it had. There's not that many children in the country to justify the audience figures that we had, and yeah, there were many pinch me moments. Sometimes they were things of personal achievement for me. When I met somebody I'd always wanted to meet, or had access to a place where I know I wouldn't have been allowed to had I not been doing something for the BBC. I can give you plenty of examples for those. But the ones that stick in my mind are the ones where simply by having the job that I had, I changed somebody's life.
Yeah.
A really vivid memory was Live and Kicking. And Live and Kicking was live on a Saturday. And one year must have been early 90s, Christmas Day fell on a Saturday. And the conversation happened in the office. Oh, it's Christmas Day, and we're going to do a live show. And it hadn't happened, certainly not within my time on the show. Oh, great! This is happening in London, and I live in Cardiff, and I'd never missed a Christmas day at home. But then it got worse because we had the idea, which is a brilliant idea, that we were going to do a live outside broadcast from a children's hospital in Manchester with Take That on Christmas Day. It's like, okay, and so I could see I could see where this is going, and everybody's looking around, and I was the most experienced outside broadcast director, and I was well used to handling big situations like this. So now I'm faced with, there's going to be, so not only the show's in London, there's this outside broadcast in Manchester. I want to be in Cardiff. And then the editor had to come, I wasn't in charge at this point. And he said, Annette, we'd like you to do the outside broadcast in Manchester. Oh, God, okay. And at that point, all I could see was the inconvenience to me. I hadn't put myself in the audience's perspective, but I'm professional. I said I would do it, and my mum and dad agreed to have Christmas dinner a bit later, so I could get back. And so we went up Christmas Eve on the train to Manchester. I had suitcases full of costumes for Take That to wear. It's packed. Everybody's leaving London to get up there, and we came up. So we checked into a hotel. And I had Christmas morning with a load of outside broadcast riggers, and not a traditional Christmas morning. And we went to this hospital. I smuggled Take That in. They were shut in a cupboard, and I got them all dressed up in Santa outfits. And in hospitals over Christmas, only seriously ill children are kept in. They try wherever possible to let children go home and be with their families, and so you knew that the children who were there were quite serious conditions, and it was magical. It was absolutely magical because one by one, they knew they were doing an outside broadcast. You can't hide that in a hospital, but they thought it was like you do on Christmas Day. It's like, messages for your family, that type of thing, and then one by one, I had these Santas come out of this cupboard and then reveal themselves to be Take That. And the look on those, not just the children's faces, but on the parents, on the nurses, none of them knew who was going to come there. They thought it was just a live link up. And And it was when Mark Owen, Babe was a single out at the time. And so there's Mark Owen standing on a chair, this children's ward, holding somebody's baby. I still to this day have no idea whose baby he was holding, but I thought that might be, you're singing a song about Babe, obviously not a baby, but visually and the impact that we had, and Take That absolutely loved it. I've seen them talk about this in documentaries subsequently and the type of thing they were asked to do. But I would challenge them not to say that that wasn't a highlight, because they weren't they were baby era, so they were first time around, but it was magical. So I had to drive down from Manchester back to Cardiff, and I thought, I've got 5 Santa costumes in the back of my car. So I remember stopping in a lay-by just before I got to my home. I put one of their Santa costumes on, and I arrived at my parents' house, and I had little nephews there, and they didn't know what, because Santa had arrived. So that was that. I can still see it so clearly, and once any inconvenience that I felt initially by being asked to do that went out the window the moment I realised the impact that we could do. And those children will remember that for the rest of their life. And that's something that I made happen. And that's happened time and time again. Before one of the last shows I used to be executive producer of before I left was a show called The Dengineers, where we made dream dens for some deserving children. So we would go in and we'd build whatever they wanted in their back garden. And again, that's had life-changing impact on those children. And it's just something we were able to do. So it's moments like that. Yes, there were some personal moments where I've met people that I've always wanted to meet, but those have been trumped by the things where just by me doing my job has made a life-changing difference to somebody else.
Yeah, that's incredible. And just before we leave this part and we of the journey to what you're doing now, I do just want to ask you, you did touch upon working during COVID. I was a nurse in COVID, and my specialism is infectious diseases and tropical medicine, HIV nursing. So I was working on a infectious diseases ward, and it's like, all I can describe is it was a bubble. It was so surreal. It was like a bubble, and you weren't really aware of other stories that were going on around in different environments. So could you share a little bit, what was that like? What was
Yeah.
COVID times like for an executive TV producer?
I suspect we were in a similar bubble, but I mean, it seems wrong to use a word like exhilarating when you know the impact that COVID had. But from a creative point of view, it was possibly the biggest challenge we faced. And at the time, I was head of children's factual programmes. So I was in charge of, programmes like Blue Peter. And initially, things shut down. So a lot of children's dramas, we shut the doors. But when all the schools shut, suddenly all the attention was on, well, how are we going to keep, the children's education going? How are we going to, everybody was looking towards the BBC to come up with answers. And then specifically within that was the factual programme area that I was in. And we never missed a beat. We moved Blue Peter. 1 week it was live in the studio. After lockdown happened, it suddenly came live from presenters' bedrooms. We were able to do so. We never missed a show. We just relocated, and what I saw was just remarkable initiative and resourcefulness. We knew that we had. We cared so much about the audience, and we knew that suddenly there were millions of children stuck at home with parents who had so many other things to juggle, and we needed to try and normalize what was going on as much as we could for our viewers. And what came out of it is that the type of shows that I make tend to be quite quick turnaround. Drama can take 18 months to produce. Live action factual programs take less time to produce. And I've probably never made as many shows so quickly. So not only did shows that were already existing, like Blue Peter, continue and not miss a beat, some shows we did have to pause. I was about to launch a series of Britain's Best Young Artist, and we couldn't do that because it required us bringing children, the contestants from all over the country to one location. You weren't allowed to do that. So in the meantime, I had Ricky Wilson from Kaiser Chiefs as one of the presenters, and said, well, let's come up with a show that we can do with Ricky, and he'll film it in his own house. So he came up with Ricky Wilson's Art Jam, which wouldn't have happened had we gone on to plan. We also wanted to do Joe Wicks was doing a lot of stuff around for health and fitness. And we thought, well, we have Mark Wright. He was one of my presenters on the Dengineers. And we turned around a daily 6-week, every morning for Monday to Friday, exercise show. I think it was on air within 10 days of us having the idea. And the only reason it took 10 days is Mark actually got COVID. And so our plans were he had to film it all from his home gym. And we were initially going to plan and film it with social distancing and all of that. But when he got COVID, we couldn't do that. So bless him, we had to direct Mark Wright in his home gym, telling him how to film everything by himself, doing 30 days of exercise videos. I mean, gosh, if he hadn't been a friend, I don't think he would have done that. But everybody just rallied. Everybody believed in what we were doing was having an impact and was important. And lots of other fast turnaround programs were made. And we also then had to tee up a lot of the other educational stuff, the live lessons and things like that. I mean, live lessons we contributed to that came out of BBC Education, but we used a lot of our resources and our people to make those happen. And I'm very proud of the work that we did during that time. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but the way my colleagues responded and our teams responded was to go, right, again, glass half full, this is what we can do, and what we were doing we knew was so important for not just the children, but the normality that gave to those families as well, knowing that their kids' lives weren't turned completely upside down because there was some continuity. So yeah, it was a creative bubble that I hadn't been in for a long time because of external forces.
When you shared your original story, when you took us up to the point in which you were made redundant, so how was that moment for you, having this incredible time, 38 years, doing something that you've always wanted to do? How did that feel? How did you navigate that moment?
Well, I've just talked enthusiastically about how COVID was and how that was a creative bubble. But after that, the industry had changed. That was a key moment in the broadcasting industry. And obviously, during my career, the whole television industry is unrecognizable from where I started. When I started, there were only 4 TV channels, and now there's endless options. And so there have been many moments throughout my TV career where there were restructures and various things. So you never get complacent. You never take your job for granted because the industry has to evolve. But post COVID, everything changed. You proved what could be done with sometimes fewer people. The appetite had changed. The rest of the wider industry had evolved differently. So it was a different environment. And so I knew the writing was on the wall, in that there was less of an appetite for the British factual entertainment content that I was doing. The emphasis was much more on commercial partnerships. Can you sell these programs internationally? And I did sell some internationally, but you find, particularly in America, they struggled with some of the more unusual British accents, and so the idea was great. It just didn't travel because we weren't making it for an international audience. I was making it for a British audience, so I knew it was coming. And you could see, there's all the salami slicing and the cutback. So I knew it was coming, but still, nothing prepares you for hearing those words, especially over a Zoom call. My big boss wasn't able to get up to Manchester, and yeah, I was told that the role is closing, and I'd been through enough processes to know it's not personal. It's not about it's never about the individual. It's about the role and the business needs. So I knew I'd had to let people go. I understood it, but But it's very different when you are on the receiving end of that. And if I'm being completely honest, the joy had gone out of the role in that, in those last couple of years post-COVID, where I could see which way the industry was going. I didn't have the same joy for the job. I still loved the people. I still cared passionately about the audience. But for me personally, it wasn't as fulfilling as it had been. However, that it wasn't my decision to leave. And when I was told, and 6 months time, you're at 6 months notice, you go, you react, you feel very vulnerable. You feel was scared. I was angry. I didn't like the way the business had gone. I was not angry that they were getting rid of me. I was just angry in the way the situation had evolved. And I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew I wanted to keep working, and I knew I had to. My daughter was still at university by this point, and I enjoyed work. I loved, I enjoy work. I like the challenges. But that was compounded by the fact I was about to turn 60. The television industry is now unrecognisable from how it was, and I knew, well, I've had the best innings I could have had. I was the longest serving person of BBC Children's. It's like, I don't want to do television anymore. So what do I do? I'd only ever done television. I'd only ever worked for the BBC. And so I did what I now encourage my clients to do. I kind of stood back and thought, well, what is it about the job that I enjoy? Is it, what are the elements that make me happy? And in latter years, I was much less hands-on. I'm producing, directing. It's much more about nurturing talent. It's much more about creative problem solving, much more about helping other people develop, finding those stories. And I thought, well, okay, so I've done this in television. Those things aren't exclusive to television. And I've got good skills. I've got good communication skills. I'm resourceful. I can look at things differently. I'm good at spotting things in people before they realize they have that. And then I thought, well, where can I apply these? Where can I apply these skills? I knew I didn't want to work for anybody else again. I didn't want anybody else to make decisions about my future. I wanted to be in charge. So I thought, I'll set up a business. Never set up a business. I'd only ever worked for a massive organisation. But out of the blue, and this is another time when, how do you know when something feels right? Hypnotherapy came to me. And I'd never experienced hypnotherapy. I didn't know anybody who had. But I'd learned to trust my instinct over the years that when an idea pops into your head, interrogate it. There could be something there. And this felt like a lot like television, actually, in that somebody comes to you with, in hypnotherapy, with an issue they want help with, or in television terms, somebody comes to you with an idea or of a program they want to make or they want to commission. And then you go, okay, where are we now? Let's look at where we need to get to and what are the steps we're going to take there. So all of the same skills just transferred from one industry to the other. You try to get to know the person. You've got to get inside the audience's head or the client's head and find out what motivates and interests them. And then you help them draw on their strengths to move forward or overcome whatever is holding them back. But at the same time, I mean, obviously, it's like I work in one career for 38 years and then two come along at the same time because I set up Silverbrook Hypnotherapy, which is my hypnotherapy business. But at the same time, I was offered an opportunity to lecture at Salford University, teaching their TV studio production module. I thought, I'm not a teacher, but I could be an associate lecturer because I was an industry expert. I thought, why not? This is something new. So in the same month, in September 2023, my business was launched and I started as a university lecturer. So that was lovely because I still had a foot in the world of TV and I was still able to pass on my skills and my knowledge to the next generation of potential program makers. But I knew I was directing more of my attention towards hypnotherapy. But I draw on my experience because I specialise in helping people with issues related to confidence, or more often lack of confidence, fears and phobias, because that's what I did for 38 years. The number of times I was the person talking to a presenter in their ear where suddenly they got brain freeze, and you see that rabbit in headlights look. And I was the one calming them down, getting them through it. I was often the one cajoling them out of the toilet and into, in front of the camera. But I also learned that there were techniques that people use to overcome their nerves and channel them in a more productive way. So the work I do now draws on that unique experience that I had from my previous career.
What is it about stepping into the spotlight that is so nerve-wracking? What do you think it is? What do you think it is? Do you think it's vulnerability, or is it a mix of combination, lots of different things?
Yeah, it's typically the fear of being judged by others and judged negatively. That's the thing. And the issue with that is that we can't control how other people respond to us. We can't. But we can control how we feel about that. And people who experience nerves, particularly around something like public speaking, it's because they are too caught up in their own head trying to second guess things that are beyond their control without focusing on the things that are within their control and things that will help boost their confidence to a point where they're able to do it. But no, I would say some people are fearful of it because they think they're not knowledgeable enough or not experienced enough. Some people don't like the sound of their own voice and think that they're boring. Some people are panicked that they're going to make a mistake, which will then snowball into a much bigger disaster. And they give too much attention and too much importance to things that aren't really there. So yeah, it's everybody. Everybody experiences nerves. Everybody. Nobody is exempt from nerves. But it's about having coping techniques that help you keep them in perspective. It's only when they get blown out of perspective and out of proportion that the problems come in.
You have written a book, Step into Your Spotlight. What is your work in television and hypnotherapy, the inspiration and the intention? And what is the intention for the book?
Yeah. So the book is called Step into Your Spotlight, and then the subheading is The TV Insider's Guide to Feeling Confident When All Eyes Are on You. And it's not a book about becoming a TV presenter, but it is drawing on the tips, the techniques, the experiences that I have seen, both from the world of television, complemented now with my experience and my understanding of psychology and therapy work, combined in a simple self-help book for people to work through and overcome whatever confidence issues are holding them back. So the idea came to me, the book was finished by the end of 2025. It came out in February 2026, but I started it probably in March 2025. And I've had the pleasure of working with many famous people over the years. I've given many people their first job. And I know what goes on behind the scenes. And when a lot of people who are lacking in confidence, when they watch people who they think are supremely confident, they're just seeing a very filtered view of that person. Mm. They're not seeing the whole person. And an example, I've mentioned Ricky Wilson previously, frontman of the Kaiser Chiefs, as well as a TV and radio host. He hates being the centre of attention. Okay, he gets physically sick sometimes before he goes on and performs as frontman of the Kaiser Chiefs. So he had to come up with a coping mechanism where he's created an alter ego. It's still Ricky Wilson, but it's a different version of Ricky Wilson. It's a persona that he can switch on and off. And this allows him, as a very shy introvert, to be able to replenish his emotional batteries and not try to be stage Ricky all of the time. That's just somebody he can switch on, perform as a brilliant, rock frontman, and then he can revert to the real Ricky. He doesn't even particularly like the stage Ricky. They would not be friends, but that is a device that he's come up with. And when you hear stories like this, and that's not the only one, and you realise, well, this is brilliant, because if you look at somebody like Ricky Wilson or Angelica Bell or Krishnan Guru Murthy, And you think, God, they've got their confidence together. And they're not knowing the whole story. They're not knowing what work those people have done before getting to that state where they're able to appear like that. So I did know this because I've known this is what I've seen. I've had this behind the scenes backstage access. And when I came up with the idea and I approached these people, because I wanted real life stories, both both client case studies, but also high profile ones that people could relate to. And everybody was so forthcoming with their tips and their advice and their personal experiences. And they all said this is the type of book that they wish they'd had when they were starting out, because we all feel our way through these things more often than not. So I knew I had these real life experiences. Also, then having worked as a hypnotherapist now, specializing in this for a number of years, I knew I had a better understanding of why they'd come across these coping mechanisms and how you could apply that in your normal everyday life, along with the work that I'd done with my clients. And I just thought, oh, there's some learning to take away from here. But I've told it through the lens of the TV shows that I've made and the people that I've worked with. And even things like it starts at chapter 10 and counts down to 0, because that's what happens in telly.
I love
And
it.
to get you. So I hope it's a really accessible book. It's not just for people who want to be TV presenters. It's for people who want to apply for the next job, or start networking, or go on a first date, or get through their driving test, or anything where confidence is holding you back, or a fear is holding you back. Because I specialize in confidence, fears and phobias, because they're all linked to your confidence
Yeah.
levels. But it's told in a really accessible way through the stories of people that you see on television every day.
Yeah, I loved the exercises and the prompts because I think it enables you to think differently about what you're going to do, and the preparation that's needed that will help you give confidence as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really great book.
Thank you.
And what are your future plans?
Well, I've been lecturing at Salford University for 3 years, and I've decided I'm going to finish at the end of this year, because much as I've enjoyed it, I'm 63 now, and I want to see how far I can go with this hypnotherapy business. And I want to explore all the opportunities that present itself. And having a regular fixed commitment during term time isn't conducive to that. And I've enjoyed the lecturing, but no, my heart is in now hypnotherapy, because I've seen the positive benefits and impact that it can have, and I I enjoy that. I get a similar enjoyment from seeing the results with a client than I used to with making a kid's dream come true. The only significant difference about what I do now is that when I've done a good job with the hypnotherapy, I rarely see that. I never see that person again, because they're sorted, they've done. But their endorsement of me usually comes through recommendations. Other people come to me having been recommended from them. So it's slightly different. You don't get that audience feedback, because once you've helped somebody overcome their fear of flying, they don't need you anymore. But so you don't have that long-term commitment. And the type of hypnotherapy I do is cognitive behavioural hypnotherapy. So it's evidence-based, it's scientific, it's based in the now. I don't regress people and find out what may or may not have happened in their past. It's about, where are you now? What is your goal? And how are we going to get there? And in order to do that, you have to start to change either the way you think, feel, or behave, and then the others follow.
So every time I interview somebody for the podcast, one of the things I ask them, but normally outside of the podcast, is what is your favorite song? Because when I do an Instagram post, I always attach the song that the person really likes. So, Annette, thank you for talking to us today. It's been an absolute joy. I just want to ask you one more question. Have you got a song that you really love in life that's been with you?
Yes, I have. And it's one that I used recently I was speaking at a summit, and they wanted some walk-on music, and it was a female empowerment summit, and everybody else chose wonderfully sort of empowering songs by Beyonce or, lots of female singers. And I chose Morecambe and Wise, Bring Me Sunshine.
Oh.
Which isn't necessarily a song you associate with female empowerment, isn't widely known outside of the UK, and isn't widely known within the UK by anybody under 40. But the reason I chose that song is that reminds me of a time in my life. Morecambe and Wise were massive. And it reminds me of a time of where everybody at home in our family, my mum and dad, brother and sister, we would all watch Morecambe and Wise. Obviously, I was a fan of television, so any of those moments that brought us together. My dad had many similar traits to Eric Morecambe. He was a very funny guy. He enjoyed entertaining, and the lyrics of that song, "Bring me sunshine, bring me joy, bring me love." I mean, you can't argue with that. And also has an additional layer is that was one of the songs we chose to play at my dad's funeral, because it just sums up a joyous feeling. And my life has been a lot about finding my joy. And that song, which seems like a bit left field, is something that captures that for me.
Annette, thank you so much for your time and energy today. It has been an absolute joy and fun.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on this podcast. It's nice to have an opportunity to reflect and take stock, and you don't always do that to work out how we've got to where we are. And so it's nice for you to have steered me through my journey.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Connection Compass podcast. For more information on Annette's work, please check the show notes for details. And if you think this episode will help somebody else, please leave a review. And finally, remember to keep talking, keep connecting for a more interconnected world. See you next time.